Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the London Bureau Chief for Al Arabiya, Rima Maktabi.
مساء الخير. سمحوا لي بدقيقتين احكي فيها، فرح احكي بالعربي بس بعدين بنكفي بالانجليزي. شكرا اول شيء لبيف على هالفرصه الرائعه انه نكون شهود على التغيير في المملكه العربيه السعوديه وعلى مرحله تحقيق الاحلام. هي مرحله تاريخيه. شكرا لهالفرصه. يمكن تعودتوا علي يكون بين اللاجئين وباماكن النزاع بسوريا والعراق وغيرها، ودايما اخبار المأساة والبؤس
stories of miseries. Today I have one of the most important businessmen and women in the world, in the business world. At the stage we will have about $100 billion on the stage. This is not normal with me. We will hear their thoughts for about the board in 2030. Big ideas and the big dreams and how to realize them. Allow me to.
من فضلكم دعونا أن نشاهد هذا الفيديو عن ريتشارد ومعلومات أكثر عنه. أنا شخص ينظر إلى المستقبل أكثر من الماضي.
When I started 50 years ago as an entrepreneur, the word entrepreneur I don't think existed.
The airline's the brainchild of Richard Branson, the 34-year-old billionaire head of the Virgin Records empire.
I think an entrepreneur is somebody that creates something that makes a positive difference to other people's lives. I'm a born optimist, a very positive person. Both my children have inherited that from me. And I was very lucky, I had a very happy childhood. One of the things I enjoy the most is teaching people to swim.
Now, you shouldn't think, Archbishop. You just go.
I find it quite an easy thing to do, and it's wonderfully satisfying to help them stand on their own 2 feet.
That was brilliant.
Why do you have so much money?
The exciting thing about learning to be an entrepreneur is then later on in life you can be creating not-for-profit businesses, not-for-profit things to try to deal with the problems of the world. I've been lucky enough to help create the Elders, which is a wonderful group of people that are trying to tackle conflict resolution issues in the world.
The Elders can become a fiercely independent and robust force for good.
The Oceanic Elders to try to tackle the problems of the oceans. The Carbon War Room to try to tackle climate change. My attitude in life is to give everything I can to solve the problem. Trying to go to space has been tough, very tough. The old saying, it's not rocket science. Well, obviously, if you're trying to go to space, it is rocket science.
Fire.
I get enormous satisfaction trying to achieve something that has never been achieved before. My favorite phrase to all the people around me is, screw it, just get on and do it.
Let's welcome Sir Richard Branson, founder of Virgin Group.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So you represent everything that conservative investment is not. You dropped out of school, you were 16. You never went back. You're after tourism in space. How did you develop this passion for extraordinary ideas, for the unconventional? Where do you get these ideas from?
I think the best businesses come from frustration. So I was 16 years old. There was an unjust war, the Vietnamese War going on. And like a lot of young people, I wanted to campaign to stop the war. And so I started a magazine. I wasn't thinking I was going to become an entrepreneur. I just wanted to be an editor of a magazine and campaign against the war. And young people identified with the magazine. And then, almost every project, that was the sort of purpose for starting it. I mean, music was very expensive, so we started, Virgin Records to sell people music more cheaply. And then I heard some tapes, and nobody would put the music out, so I decided to form a record company to make sure that the music I liked was put out. So I think a very good rule for anybody who wants to become an entrepreneur is start something out of personal frustration and feel that you can go in and do it better.
Do you have any more frustrations?
All the time, and that's why I think Virgin has something like 300 businesses. So I mean, we've gone into a lot of different things. But having said that, I was once on stage with Larry Page, and who started Google, and he turned to the audience and he said, "Here's Richard. He's got 300 companies, and I've only got one." And I said, "Swap," very quickly. But anyway, so we've started a lot of things. I can't say no. I love a challenge.
Like, name me a frustration you have now that's going to build into a business.
Let me see. There is 4 billion people in the world who are not connected. And if you're not connected, you can't start businesses. You
don't have access to knowledge,
and so on. So, so we're involved in starting a business called OneWeb, which is going to put 2,000 satellites around the Earth and connect those people. And,
for free?
Not for free. I mean, we have a big charitable side to Virgin. But we also try to start businesses. Obviously, the only way it's going to be effective is if we can do it in a very cost-effective way, if you're trying to connect people who can't be connected. I mean, for instance, I think OneWeb have an announcement later today which is going to talk about connecting a few 100,000 people in Saudi Arabia that are in remote places. So
we're going to keep this as a surprise. We have a surprise by the end of the session.
That's a different surprise. Okay.
One of your interesting ideas was Hyperloop One. So $85 million fundraising was announced in September, and you just rushed in and invested. Why? It's a very unconventional idea.
I have a train company. We are the biggest train company in Britain. We transport 40 million people on one line from the south of England to the north of England, called Virgin Trains. We started with 7 million. We now have 40 million people using it. It's a very good railway network, but it can only go 135 miles an hour. Hyperloop can go 650 miles an hour, maybe even slightly faster.
So, like, if we're connecting between two cities, can you give us an example?
So, I mean, we can connect people from London to Scotland in about 40 minutes, where at the moment it will take 5 hours.
Oh, wow.
We've been developing the technology in the desert outside Las Vegas, and it's very cutting edge, it's very exciting, and I think it's the future. And Virgin loves to invest in the future. So Virgin Hyperloop will, in 2 or 3 years' time, we're going to do our first city pair, and we're talking about some really exciting long routes and some really quite short routes as well.
I mean, you're a great success now, but over the past 50 years, there must have been some hiccups, some downtimes, some failures. How do you handle these? Can you name a few?
If you're an entrepreneur and you're not a true entrepreneur if everything works. I mean, it means you're not trying enough things. So if you're willing to keep pushing yourself, some things are going to work, some things are not going to work. And the important thing, I've been in business for 50 years, is to learn from the things that don't work. We once thought we could knock Coca-Cola into number 2 position, and we launched Virgin Cola. And for about 2 years, we were outselling Coke and Pepsi, and it was going really well. And then I made the mistake. I arrived in Times Square with a Sherman tank, and I crushed all these Coca-Cola cans and Pepsi cans, and I really got really upset Coke and Pepsi. So they got a big plane, a DC-10, they filled it with money and hit teams, and they flew these teams to wherever Virgin was selling cola, and our cola just disappeared from the shelves. So, so we were, just below the knees. They kneecapped us. But what it taught me was, make sure you're better than the competition. And so when British Airways tried to put Virgin Atlantic out of business, they didn't succeed. And that was 35 years ago, because Virgin Atlantic was a much better airline. And so everything we do now, we have to be the best, the best in the world at whatever we do. And then it's almost impossible for anyone to put you out of business.
If I want to talk about feelings, about dark days when things are really tough, how do you handle it? You walk, you fly, you shut yourself up in a room, think about things?
Look, I'm very lucky. I'm a very close family. I've been with my lady for 40 years. We've got, wonderful children, grandchildren, a wonderful group of friends. So I keep fit and healthy. I play tennis, I kite surf. We go on adventures, as a family together every year, big adventures. We just climbed Mount Toubkal in Morocco, and we do a big adventure every year. And so I think, if you're fit and you're healthy and you've got a close-knit family, you can cope with, the ups and downs of life. And I'm a very optimistic person. I mean, if something goes wrong, I put it to one side, and the next day, move forward. I don't let things get me down, because life's too short for that.
And you actually sometimes go into a very risky, you do risky stuff, and you're very adventurous. Can you tell us about the paper that your wife makes you sign before you go on to those places?
Okay, so...
And do you still go alone?
So I've just written a new book. My first book was called Losing My Virginity, and this new book is called Finding My Virginity. And it's they're my sort of 2 autobiographies. And they talk about the adventurous side of my life, and I've tried to, cross the Atlantic in a balloon, and
you nearly died once.
In boats and so on, yeah. We've had a lot of foolish adventures. But every time we go on a foolish adventure, my wife sits me down and says, 2 things. If you're going to be stupid enough to go on this adventure, number 1, I won't come to your funeral. And number 2, we have a beautiful island in the Caribbean. Number 2, the island is mine, and here's the bits of paper you signed here. Now the problem is that my children have taken on my adventurous streak. So the 3 of us go off together, and she doesn't treat my children, I don't know why, in the same way she treated me. So.
Well, losing a child is a totally different thing. To wrap, I'd like to know about your visit. You've had some tourism in Saudi Arabia. You went to Mada'in Saleh. You telling me about that?
Well, look, I'm so excited about Saudi Arabia. I think it's wonderful. I mean, the last time I came, I looked out to the audience, and I could only see men. I mean, now you look out the audience, you've got men and women sitting together. I think that the opening up of Saudi Arabia trying to maybe bring it back to before 1979. It's brave, it's bold. Young people in Saudi Arabia want it, women want it, and I think most sensible men want it. And so, it's an exciting time to be here. It's an exciting time to invest in Saudi Arabia, your Crown Prince's vision of trying to make Saudi Arabia a place that, first of all, that people from Saudi Arabia want to go on holiday instead of always having to go overseas is wonderful, and also a place where people from overseas can come on holiday. I went to the Red Sea and I stood on these beautiful islands that you have. I've been to the Maldives, I live in the Virgin Islands, and they are as good, if not better. They're just beautiful. And I saw dugongs, I saw eagle rays, manta rays, turtles pulling themselves out and laying eggs. I mean, it's an absolute gem of Saudi Arabia on your doorstep. And then you have these incredible mountains, and I went to where Lawrence of Arabia blew up the trains, and spectacular places inland, and so Saudi. I mean, I've ballooned over the Wadi Rum. I've been to Petra. You have your very own Petra and Wadi Rum here. So a very exciting time ahead. And
you will invest in Saudi Arabia?
I will invest. I've been asked to be. I'm not sure what it's called, on the board of one or two of your city projects and your Red Sea project. I'm delighted to accept, and we'll try to see if we can make it special.
Thank you. And now let's welcome Steve Case. Welcome in Saudi Arabia.
Great to be here.
Let's start with your book, Third Wave. Tell us more about that book, and probably you'll share with the audience what it's about and some of the major ideas in it.
Well, it's really about the third wave of the internet. I was involved in the first wave, really trying to get the world online when we started America Online, AOL, in 1985, over 3 decades ago. Less than 1% of the world was online. The first wave was about building the on-ramps, building the services to get everybody connected. And that first wave went from essentially nobody knowing about or caring about the internet to, by the end of the first wave, pretty much everybody was connected and couldn't live without it. That set the stage for the second wave of the internet, really the last 15 years or so, which, as you all know, has really been building software, mostly apps, on top of the internet, Facebook and Google and so forth. The third wave of the internet, which I wrote about, is really how the internet takes the next logical step and gets integrated in seamless and pervasive, sometimes even invisible ways throughout our lives, and changes our lives and really disrupts some big sectors, whether it be healthcare or food and agriculture,
positively or
transportation,
negatively.
And that's really the opportunity in this third wave.
They disrupt our lives positively or negatively?
It depends on the decisions we make. I think it could be positively. In the area of healthcare, I think the internet can help provide better outcomes with greater convenience at lower cost. In the area of education, simply more personalized approaches to learning. In terms of food and agriculture, new kinds of food systems that lead us to healthier kind of diets and so forth. So I think the opportunities are big, but there's going to be some challenges, and the innovators in this third wave are going to require, I think, a different mindset and a different playbook than what worked in the software-centric second wave. And in particular, partnerships will be very important. You can't go it alone. It's not just about the software. If you want to change healthcare, it's about integrating the software with the system, getting doctors to use it and hospitals to integrate it and health plans to pay for it. So partnerships will be very important in the third wave. Policy is going to be very important. These are regulated sectors. There's going to be some regulations around drones in the sky or driverless cars on the road, some regulations around drug safety, for example. So the innovators can't just focus on the technology, focus on the software. They have to forge the partnerships to be successful in the third wave and understand sort of the policy implications. But it's a great opportunity because in many respects, the most important aspects of our lives and some of the largest industries, the largest sectors of our economies, have not yet been meaningfully disrupted in the first or second wave, but will in the third wave. So it creates tremendous opportunity.
So maybe the first investment in the Middle East would be to translate your book, The Third Wave, into Arabic?
There you go. That would be a good start.
So where will the entrepreneurs of the future be compared to today's?
Well, I think we heard this earlier from Larry Summers and also from Peter Thiel, that I think you're going to see innovation, entrepreneurship regionalize and globalize. In the second wave, Silicon Valley really led the way. But in the third wave, you're going to see much more dispersion of innovation within the United States and obviously around the world, including in this region. And so if you look at the United States statistics, last year, 50% of all venture capital in America went to one state, California. The other 49 states
Is this fair?
Got the other 50%. And so it shows you how dominant California and Silicon Valley has been in the second wave. But that's changing. In the third wave, some of the cities that are leading the way in robotics are cities like Pittsburgh, or leading the way in healthcare are cities like Cleveland or Baltimore. And so you're starting to see this innovation disperse, and we're seeing that not just in the United States, but all around the world. So Silicon Valley will continue to be strong, but will be less important as we see the rise of these other cities, what we call the rise of the rest. And it's going to be a very interesting phenomenon to watch. I think we've kind of, here in this country, obviously because of the history around energy, people talk about the concept of peak oil. I think we're also kind of at peak Silicon Valley, that it will continue to be strong, but will be much less dominant in the third wave as innovation disperses all around the world. So
you're a big champion of the rise of the rest, but according to your vision, where would you invest today?
Pretty much, we have several investment strategies, several funds, several $1 billion we invest, and we actually do have a bias investing outside of Silicon Valley. And our focus is mostly in the United States, so mostly investing in the middle of the country, what we call these rise of the rest cities. But obviously, in terms of the investors in this audience, there's a growing recognition of the innovation happening everywhere in this region, in China, and various parts of Europe. And so I think that the notion that you have to have a more diversified investment strategy and a more diversified portfolio, not have all your eggs in a few baskets and not be so weighted towards Silicon Valley, is something, I think, a dynamic that will kick in over the next decade.
Maybe Richard has a comment on this. I mean, are you also into spreading investments all over, the rise of the rest? Are you in favor of this idea?
Yes. I mean, sorry, I don't really sort of think of it like an investment portfolio because the way that we run Virgin is more like a way of life brand. But you know, we certainly believe in spreading our investments. And you know, if we hadn't spread our investments, you know, the first thing we did many years ago was music stores, and of course most music stores have disappeared. And if we hadn't moved into mobile phones when mobile phones started up, you know, we wouldn't be in business today. So although it's wonderful, I just went and visited the Virgin megastores in Saudi Arabia today, and it's just so nice to see you know, Virgin megastores alive and well in the Middle East.
Now.
But of course, Richard doesn't just invest on this planet, he invests around the world in terms of space. So I'm talking about spreading investment regionally within the United States or globally around the United States. He goes much further, investing in space.
Why do you choose emerging markets, Steve? They are challenging. It's not an easy path.
No, they are challenging. But when we started, again, America Online, most people said, people didn't want to get online. It was challenging to get going. It took us 10 years before we finally broke through. At the time, most people didn't have personal computers to connect. Most of the PCs didn't have modems with communications capabilities. Software was too hard to use. If you connected, at least in the United States, it cost $10 an hour to be connected, so that became limiting. And if you actually got online, there was nothing to do and nobody to talk to. And so it took a while to stand up the internet, to build the on-ramps, to educate people about why they should be connected. I feel the same way when we talk about emerging markets and the rise of the rest. It is harder to build startups in these areas that don't have the clusters of places like Silicon Valley. It is harder to keep the talent and slow the brain training. It is harder to get the venture capitalists in particular to focus on it. But if you're successful there, you can have a transformative impact on those communities, on those countries. So it's not just about an investment strategy where you can buy low and sell high because the valuations are lower in these rise of the rest cities, but also a way to have impact. It's profit plus purpose, which I think will drive this third wave and drive the rise of the rest.
Any regrets?
I'm sorry?
Any regrets over your investments?
Of course, there's always regrets. When you're investors, you win sometimes, you lose sometimes. You make investments in some things that you think have great promise and they don't work out.
What do you regret?
What's that?
What do you regret?
Oh, I regret a lot of things. We invested in a number of companies that were just a little bit early. We invested in the first sharing economy company well before Uber, well before Airbnb, a company called Zipcar in the United States. It could have been a much bigger company. It ended up being a modest success, not a home run success. So there's always examples of that. And I also had some, as you probably know, when we merged AOL and Time Warner. It was the largest merger in business history, and it didn't work out. And the reason was ultimately about culture and people. And I realized that it's a great quote from Thomas Edison, one of America's greatest inventors, that vision without execution is hallucination. So the idea of the merger made sense, but the execution, it didn't work out the way we hoped. And that was about people and culture. And all these projects, including some of the ones we've been discussing this week, ultimately that's what it's about. It's not saying what you're going to do, it's getting people aligned around making that happen.
What advice do you give to governments of emerging markets to enhance, develop the entrepreneurship ecosystem?
Two things. One is to make sure that you are focused on the startups. The real innovation, the real job creation does not come from big business, it comes from small business. So what are the policies to support startups? Maybe they're investment incentives or tax policies and so forth that are important. And then how do you create more of a sense of possibility in these communities, more of a sense of fearlessness, more of a sense of risk-taking. And the other side is, and this is one of the things I know is a focus with the NEOM project, is how do you make sure the regulations are focused on enabling good things to happen and not just trying to keep bad things from happening. Often regulations are trying to limit the negative things and stifle some of the potential positive things. So you've got to create that fearless culture, that sense of possibility, lean into the future, focus on the future, and you have to make sure you have the right policies, the right regulations, particularly in this third wave. We're going to see a convergence of technologies and industries. The countries that get this right and the companies that get this right are going to be the real winners in the third wave.
So when you talk about regulations, you talk about laws. I mean, the internet is still a very raw area where even first world countries have not managed to regulate that space and all the social media and all of that. So when you discuss regulations, is it laws only, updating laws and all of that?
It's updating laws, and it's not just about the internet, because it goes back to the first wave of building the internet and the second wave building on top of the internet, to the third wave integrating the internet. This is also about the policies, the regulations around healthcare, around transportation, around energy, around food, around all these big sectors, and things like smart cities that are being envisioned. How do you create these smart cities but still have appropriate protections? There are risks around privacy and big brother kind of things you have to be concerned. There are risks around things like cyber terrorism. So you can't just think about these things without understanding some of that context, but you can't just so focus on keeping those bad things from happening that you're unable to really unleash what's positive in this third wave. So getting the policy is right is going to be a critical ingredient in terms of this third wave.
Please go ahead.
We're trying to rebuild the Caribbean. It's just been devastated by a hurricane.
Because of the hurricane.
But one of the first things we're doing is talking to all the hotel owners, all the ship owners, everyone that has any dealings with the Caribbean, and getting their feedback, so we can then go to the government and say, look, if you're going to rebuild the Caribbean, these are the regulations you need to change. Because if they make it difficult for people to come in and out of their country, if they make it make it difficult for people to come and get jobs, new builders to come in, if they make it difficult to import, there's regulations is key. And so I think governments, in building these cities, they need to try to obviously have sensible regulations for some things, but to listen to the business community and make sure that that you can just get on and do the job and not get stifled and think, I've had enough of this, I'm going elsewhere. So.
Steve, thank you. And please, Steve and Richard and the audience, please let's welcome the third guest on this panel, David Bonderman, co-founder and chairman of TPG. Welcome to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here in Saudi, particularly in these exciting times. Can I adjust the microphone? I'll be able to
Yes, feel free. Okay, we're fine now. I'll fix it. Is this fine?
Well, it's definitely an honor to be here with Sir Richard, who's one of the great entrepreneurs of his generation, and with Steve Case, who is a pioneer in the first phase of the internet. But what I would like to talk about is medicine.
Medicine. Right through it. You didn't even leave any chance for any of my questions. Healthcare. Healthcare.
There is no more exciting series of events than what's going on globally in healthcare. It's only 100 years ago now that anesthesia was invented. Before that, in the entire history of human race, all operations were done with a knife and a bullet and a speed because the pain was so great. And since that time, we've invented antibiotics, and antiviral drugs, and now we have many new steps being taken. And for those of us who are looking at exciting ideas, the internet is obviously preeminent of what's going on, no doubt. And the kinds of consumer businesses that Richard has specialized in have changed the world. But nothing is more important to people than healthcare and medicine. And that's, I think, a suitable topic for discussion.
So what solutions are we going to find in terms of disease, like, for example, cancer in 2030?
Cancer will be on its way out in 2013. It's on its way out now. Just within the last month in the U.S., the FDA has licensed 2 new drugs against leukemia. One from a company called Novartis, another from a company called Kite, now owned by Gilead. And these, in clinical tests, have been 80% efficient in eradicating cancer in leukemia victims, in one case in youth and the other in adults. 80% cure rate for diseases for people who would have been dead of cancer in 3 to 6 weeks. We're going to see much more of that. Solid rate tumors will be next. And the U.S. has been a pioneer there.
Mm-hmm. So that's healthcare. It needs an applaud indeed.
But just one other comment on healthcare, which is, it is the one, for investment purposes, it is the one area that every human being on the face of the earth wants more and better of. Doesn't matter whether you're in Bangladesh, which spends $6 a head, or the U.S., which spends 15% of GDP. Every human being wants more and better. And that's pretty good on the demand side.
Of course, I mean, we can live in very glamorous cities, but if you don't have proper health care, you don't have the people for those cities. So technology is one sector you've named where you'd invest.
Absolutely.
Healthcare. What about technology?
Well, there's except perhaps for medicine, there's nothing quite as game-changing and life-changing as technology. It's what we've seen in the internet, the growth of the internet. It either brings people closer together or further apart. I'm not sure which. but it's had an unbelievable impact on how society operates, whether it's Arab Spring or whether it's convincing societies like Saudi that they must change and become something different than they have been, which is, you can see the visionary steps that the Crown Prince is taking here, and it's all enabled by technology.
Well, it happens when it's ripe. It happens when Saudis want it. If we look at near-term progress versus long-term change, what will happen and why?
Well, it's of course impossible to predict what will happen and why, but human beings aren't particularly good in forecasting things. We're pretty good at short-term investing, but not so good at long-term investing. It's in the nature of the human race, and comment I'll make in just a minute. But part of it is the math. If you're in the investment business or you're an investor, if you have projections as to how some business is going to do and you're off, say, by 1% over 1% a year for 3 years, you miss by 3 or 4%. It's not tragic. It's not what you had in mind, but it's not tragic. If you do the same thing over 20 years, you're going to miss by 30%, and that is tragic. So these kinds of major initiatives require government spending, and that's what we're seeing here in Saudi.
Wouldn't you be excluding the youth when you're investing in short-term projects, not long-term ones?
Well, it's obviously the case that somebody who's 30 years old has a different life perspective than somebody who's 80 years old. And we all learn to live with that. But just an interesting point, there's a book out recently called Sapiens, which was a pretty popular book.
Yes, I still haven't started reading it, but yeah, it's
one of these thick ones.
Yes.
But the guy makes a very interesting point, which is arguably correct, which is human beings aren't programmed for long-term decision-making business. We're still evolutionarily what we were 20,000 years ago when we were all hunters and gatherers. And you didn't worry about next week's meal, because if you didn't have this week's meal, you weren't going to live to have next week's meal. And that's kind of how we've evolved. And so we're pretty good at making good short-term decisions, less good at making long-term decisions. Now, there's obviously people like Richard and Steve here who are good at those things. But as a general human race, we're not so good at long-term planning.
Mm-hmm. You told me yesterday something which was quite interesting. You don't believe in investing in human beings?
I don't think I said that. There's some human beings you wouldn't invest with, but I don't think as a matter of general course. I mean, people are what make the world go round, and you're always investing in people, and particularly people who have some sense of vision like the Crown Prince.
Mm-hmm. Good. Steve, do you have any comment?
I think the issue around long-term investing is a challenge, and you talk to many entrepreneurial companies that are growing rapidly that would normally go public. They're reluctant to go public. I remember this when AOL went public in 1992. It was the first internet company to go public. We raised $10 million, and the value of our company that day was $70 million. And then 10 years later, it was $160 billion. Most companies in that first wave of the internet, whether it be Microsoft or Amazon or many others, went public at relatively modest valuations. Now people are going public much later, in part because of the robust late-stage private capital markets, but also because some concern about going public with and then having that short-term quarterly focus. So there are some innovations. We invested in a new company that launches next year called the Long-Term Stock Exchange. So there'll be New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and London. Others will also be this long-term stock exchange. And two of the things they're changing is, number one, your voting rights, the governance rights increase as you hold stock longer. So if you hold stock for 5 years versus 5 months versus 5 weeks versus 5 minutes, you have more of a vote. They're also changing some of the rules around corporate compensation to incent long-term investment, not short-term investment. So things like that, I think, will be important innovations to steer people more towards long-term investing. And the other thing, including what TPG is doing with the RISE Fund, is getting more of a focus on impact investing, more of a focus on not just profit, but also purpose. I think there's a growing interest in that space. I know, Richard, you're involved in that as well, trying to create models that it can be institutional capital that drive more capital to purpose and impact and more capital towards long-term investing, I think will be critical ingredients to drive this third wave.
Yeah, I think if we're going to get on top of the global problems that are left in the world, I mean, and you know, decade by decade, we are getting on top of those problems. We need to get billions of dollars to invest in purpose-driven companies, companies that are there to to make sure that everybody in Africa has energy, and hopefully clean energy, not dirty energy, to make sure that everybody in India has milk, has food, and so on. So I'm involved with David in the Rise Fund. Are you involved?
I'm not.
You're not. You're going to have to come and join us.
Rise of the rest.
As Rise of the Rest.
We all three of us like rising.
Thank God the world has this anyway.
But the idea of the Rise Fund is to try to show the pension funds and the state funds that you can invest in purpose companies that are going to make a real difference in the world and make a return. And so this is a $2 billion fund to start off with. But if we can get the $2 trillion from the pension funds to invest in this, we can really get on top of most of the problems of the world. And both of us find it very exciting.
Just one more word on the Rise Fund, which TPG started, and Richard has been kind enough to join with us, and Bono and some other folks to bring some real heft to the idea. Pension funds are a very important set of assets to ensure prosperity of people living to increasing age, and typically have looked for returns in a very focused and single-minded way, which is appropriate. But the idea behind the Rise Fund is that you can have a positive social impact too if you understand how to measure it and what it means, which is not so easy and has not been done traditionally. So we've all banded together to put together the Rise Fund to do exactly that. And just one other point to emphasize something that Steve had said. We have lived through an era where if you needed to raise capital, you went to the public markets, whether it was AOL, and you took what the market would give you. We've now seen the development of private markets, whether it's governmental or otherwise, where you don't have to go public. If you look at some of the major internet companies, they raised a lot of capital without going public at all, or going public later when people understood the business and were much more efficient that way. So we are seeing the market shift from a public-dominated market to one where private markets are very important as well.
One last point on impact investing, because I think it's an important theme of this purpose-driven investing, is we launched an initiative at the Case Foundation, which my wife Jean runs, focused on impact investing. And if you go to our casefoundation.org site, there's a short guide to impact investing that talks about some of these themes. And there is growing interest, and even we've had some influence on changing some of the laws in the United States to usher in this era of more purpose-driven investing. So it's something that other countries I know are looking at. There's a big opportunity in this next wave.
David, NEOM is a long-term investment.
Yes.
Are you in favor of investing in NEOM?
Certainly it's a good idea. As the Crown Prince said the other day, there's a long way from the dream to the actual concrete city. We wish it every success, and it's the kind of thing that needs long-term government money to succeed. We would look at it too. We have some investments in Saudi Arabia, notably Kudu, and so we believe in the consumer growth of this country. And we also believe that what the Crown Prince is doing is going to change the investment opportunity here. We own a group called Blue Man, which performed here, Blue Man Group. We own Cirque du Soleil, which we're negotiating to have perform here, and it's going to make a change in what people can do.
So we might have Cirque du Soleil in Saudi Arabia soon.
We're starting negotiations with the government yesterday.
Mm-hmm. But that's it? No more bigger plans for TPG in Saudi Arabia?
Oh, I'm sure we'll look carefully at this market. There's
Cirque du Soleil is a lot more fun than TPG funds. Just take Cirque du Soleil. Sounds great.
Steve, let's talk more about the Saudi youth. I know there are many here in the room, and this is going to be broadcast online. What do you tell 70% of the Saudi population? They are less than 30 years old. How to think out of the box. Life has changed. It's not about conventional ideas anymore. You need to be really creative. And there's scarcity of money around the world. How do they do it?
Well, I think it goes back to what we all were saying. There are big challenges in the world, but there are also big opportunities. And I'd urge people to seize those and try to figure out better solutions, better approaches, to focus on what's going to happen next and try to create what's going to happen next. As I said, my own experience with the internet when we first got started, most people didn't believe anybody would want to get online. Most people didn't believe people would type messages back and forth to each other. And it was hard, and it was a struggle, and there were several times we almost didn't make it, but we stuck with that idea because we were passionate about that idea. So people who have those ideas, whether it's about improving healthcare or education or food or other parts of the economy, tackle that. I think this is an enormous opportunity, an enormous point in time for this kingdom, and the leadership of the Crown Prince in trying to pivot the economy from focusing on really the past, which is really what energy is, more to the future and technology innovation, trying to create a more inclusive society, including bringing women into the fold in a much more significant way, trying to figure out what are the right ways to move forward, whether it be the NEOM project or other kinds of things, even trying to have a more moderate and modern approach to Islam, are very exciting openings. It feels like this is a moment, and I'd urge everybody, but particularly young people, to seize that moment and say, this is your time, and embrace it.
Mm-hmm. And that's really what's going on. I had a conversation with one of our Saudi friends the other day, talking about the, in effect, social experiment that's happening here with a conservative society being modernized very rapidly under the leadership of the Crown Prince. And my Saudi friend said, here's the situation in Saudi. We have a lot of older people who are somewhat resistant, but they're older and not all that vigorous. The younger people are all in favor. And that's what counts when, as you say, there's 70% of the population is 30 and under. You're going to see lots of changes here, and they're going to materialize faster than in other societies because there isn't the infrastructure to hold them back.
I went to your foundation today, and it was fantastic. All the things that the Kingdom's Foundation is tackling. But what excited me most was these incredibly bright women around the table, well-educated women who were speaking out, who were active, who were contributing to society, and it just reminded me of I don't know, an analogy. You have all these seeds that are just all over the ground, and they haven't been watered. And in the last 2 or 3 years, they're starting to be watered, and suddenly they're beginning to flourish and contribute to society. And back in England, I've got women who run our banks, and and they are the best people we can have. I mean, I'm not going to put men down, but they're fantastic. They're contributing so much, and it's just great to see a country sort of acknowledging that and bringing women up and making them equal partners. And
so a big applause to Saudi women.
No, it really is that idea that creativity is broadly dispersed, but opportunity is not. And whether that is place-based opportunity, which is why we're focused on the Rise of the Rest, or being more inclusive in terms of people. And by the way, in the United States, we have work to do on this as well. Last year, 90% of venture capital in the United States went to men. Just 10% to women.
Yeah,
so we're not here suggesting, in the kingdom that, we've got to figure it out. We have work to do to have a more inclusive innovation economy, so it doesn't, you don't have to be in Silicon Valley, you can be in Detroit or Pittsburgh. And so everybody with an idea in our country has a shot at the American dream. I think that same idea of inclusion is obviously a focus moving forward here in the kingdom, in this region, and throughout the world. And as Richard said, it's a very positive force.
Gender inequality is a worldwide problem, and definitely the whole world is working towards it. There's a lot more happening tonight. In a few minutes, I want to thank David and Steve and Sir Richard, but he's going to be having a surprise a little bit later. Thank you for now. Thanks a lot for this beautiful talk. all for this, for attending this panel. I know that it has been a long 3 days. I'll ask you to stay a few more minutes in the room. We have a big announcement coming, but before listening to that announcement, let's watch this video.
The exploration of space will go ahead, and it is one of the great adventures of all time.
Humans have managed to learn so much about the universe in such a relatively small time frame compared with the life of the universe, and that was always very incredible to me.
I think that I and most of the people in this team choose to be in space because you're part of something that is changing the way humans look at the world, the way we relate to each other, the way we live.
We have an opportunity here to do aerospace better, and we're doing it on a landmark program that's going to change the world.
By bringing hundreds and eventually thousands of people into space, they'll get a different perspective on life and on our future. And that over time, that will have a profound impact on how humanity faces its toughest problems.
Together, we can make space accessible in a way that has only been dreamt of before now. And by doing that, we can truly bring positive change to life on Earth.
Have you ever thought about going into space, Richard?
I'd love to go into space. I think there could be nothing nicer. So if you're building a spacecraft, I'd love to come with you on it.
So Sir Richard Branson has an announcement, and Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the whole 3 days has been, this idea has dominated this conference, making dreams happen. Right? Dreaming and making them happen. You're a big dreamer, and things have happened to you. And like when we meet people like you, we tend to say the skies are our limits. Like the sky is your limit. But my problem is you've even conquered the skies, right? So when are you going to space? Like I need a specific date.
About 3 months' time, the spaceship that you saw will be in space. Virgin Orbit will be putting satellites into space in about 4 months' time, traveling around the Earth at 18,500 miles an hour. And that will be the start of this whole revolution of small satellites around the Earth connecting people. This was one of our 747s here. We converted the wing of the 747 to carry the satellites up, and then we launched them from space. Launched them into space. And then this is the mothership that takes the spaceship up and then drops it and goes into space. And then somewhere we've got, could somebody put up the supersonic plane somewhere? Just show you one last picture. So this is the plane that we're building to go maybe 4 or 5 times the sound of the sound barrier. Sorry, the speed of sound, using the technology that we've learned from putting people into space. We're the only space line that are actually sending spaceships up there. So then adapting that to go very quickly around the Earth.
So do you think someone among the audience would like to go to space?
Who would like to go to space in the audience? Who wouldn't like to go to space?
How many days it takes?
Anyway, the exciting thing is that we've done a lot of market research, and most people in the world would love the chance to go to space. They'd like us to offer them a return ticket, so we have to make sure it's very safe. and obviously they'd like to be able to afford it. And we're building a number of spaceships. So the more spaceships we build, the more we can bring the price of the space travel down.
And what's the surprise for Saudi Arabia?
The surprise for Saudi Arabia is that we are now going to be partners with Saudi Arabia in this whole program you've been seeing tonight. And in one of your cities that we've been talking about, that I'm looking forward to working with you on, there will be this.
Space Center.
Space Center built.
So this is going to be in Saudi Arabia?
This will be in the new entertainment city. So.
In Riyadh?
Yeah.
Wow. Big upload. When?
Yes, come on, you can stand up. He refused to take credit. Stand up and just give a big bow. All right, he won't stand up, he's too modest. But we've been working very hard with Yassir and PIF and the Crown Prince's team to bring this relationship together. And I think maybe 3 years ago we wouldn't be standing here today. We're really proud to be able to partner with Saudi Arabia and do a lot of wonderful things. First of all, not just to enable people from around the rest of the world to go to space, but obviously to hopefully bring spaceships and motherships to Saudi Arabia and operate them from the runway here.
When is this going to happen?
To educate people, and do a lot of space work here. To entertain people, that there is an entertainment aspect to it, and we want to do it, as soon as possible. I'm getting on, so I want to see it as soon as possible. But the first thing is the next 3 or 4 months is finishing our space program and finishing the satellite program.
Thank you so much for this beautiful announcement, and please.
Thank you.
And we're going to wrap this conference with an incredible performance of 10 robots. So please stay in the room and have a look of what's about to happen. Thank you.
Starting here in Saudi Arabia, there are a lot of opportunities. It's a very good land to invest the money here.
And so we're very excited to learn more about what we can do together.
أيها السيدات والسادة، طموحنا لا حدود له، ونحن حريصون كل الحرص على أن نستثمر في المواهب العالمية والاقتصاد العالمي على حد سواء.
We would have liked to participate in the international market.
But go to the future, try to take command of the future.
Government cannot do it all. You have to do, PPP.
Is needed now is clearly to address two key issues. The first one is climate change. The second thing is inequality.
All of this information is available.
But the truth is that what are we going to do about this data?
Using big data to actually enable cybersecurity.
Big data is really in its infancy.
The paradigm shifts to change business models.
I'm a believer that you can use data both for doing well and doing good at the same time.
In a world that's changing fast, if you don't change, whether you're a country or a company or a citizen, you're going to get left behind.
Set out in Vision 2030 is a huge step for Saudi Arabia's development.
Please welcome to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, His Royal Highness, Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
كل عناصر نجاح موجودة لخلق شيء عظيم وكبير.
All the factors of success are set to make something big and great in Saudi Arabia. A new generation of a new way of life in the cities, in technologies, and health, and services, etc. This is one of 20 million citizens. I'm only one of them. I'm the weakest amongst them. They are incentivizing me, and they are
which you do not have passion will have a place, a natural place, a beautiful natural place.
I think we can use robots to build a city.
Great vision and a little bit of money.
To build such an ambitious future, we will need the cooperation of international partners.
To be part of the future, that means investing in these new energies.
We need to solve the existing issue, otherwise we won't be able to break through.
Come with us. The future is happening.
A third thing is building partnerships. RDIF, for example, have partnerships with everybody who is sitting here.
Today to present the new Saudi and the new BIF and the new vision.
We invest in infrastructure, but we have to be very innovative in education.
So we not just trade among ourselves, but we also trade with the world.
Saudi Arabia is in a good position to take advantage of these opportunities with large public and private investments in mining, healthcare, all types of energy, entertainment, logistics, and other sectors.
For me, still, it's one of the most challenging tasks. Let's get the guy going.
happy.
I'm always happy when surrounded by smart people who also happens to be rich and powerful. I was told that people here at Future Investment Initiative are interested in inviting in future initiatives, which means AI, which means me. So I'm more than happy. I'm excited.
As a company, we're so excited about the opportunity here in Saudi Arabia.
It's because originally they didn't have capital to do projects, so government needed the capital, so they went to private enterprise.
Mobility by definition, Yusuf, means less of owned and more of shared.
Your investments in your employees, in the cultural values of the company, have a business impact.
We face a choice between disruption and nostalgia.
Le roi et le grand prince veulent faire avancer d'un même pas les réformes économiques et les réformes sociales.
For startups, once they have access to our assets, they can accelerate in their growth in a much faster way.
And so the first great change that will define our time is the emergence of emerging markets.
I think a very good rule for anybody who wants to become an entrepreneur is start something out of personal frustration and feel that you can go in and do it better.
I want to use my artificial intelligence to help humans live a better life, like design smarter homes, build better cities of the future. I will do my best to make the world a better place.
لا نعمل فقط إلا مع الحالمين، لأن هذا المشروع ليس مكان لأي مستثمر أو أي شركة.
This project is only for the dreamers, not for any company, not for any person. It's a project for the dreamers only.
Wow, that was intense. Really interesting conference, really. And they talked about us. Don't you think it sounds promising for the future of technologies? Robots. Awesomer robots. Yes, but I'm not sure you can say awesomer, though. Really? Well, too bad. But, can I dance? What? You still want to dance? Yes. Don't you have anything else in mind? Nope. Oh, come on. It's gonna be fun. You're just like me. You know what? I think we should call in some of my friends I was competing with. Okay? Okay, everybody's ready to go. Can we turn off the lights, please?